First thing I always do when I speak these days is to turn my hearing aids off. There is a very good reason for this, and it's not so that I can't hear the snoring. It's actually because, and please shout at me if it happens, I can tend to go a little sotto voce at times. I get lost in my own thoughts and don't speak loud enough, and with my hearing aids on, I think I'm speaking louder than I am. So, that's my first job. Little introduction, well actually probably quite a big introduction, because after 80 years of life I've got a lot of introduction to give, shall we say, but I won't cover all of it. First thing to say is I think you saw earlier on the screen that I was born Jewish. My mother was a Polish Jew. I was born right at the end of the Second World War, so that tells you how old I am. Quick sums. Because of the situation, because my mother was actually a Polish Jew who left Poland just before the war and was the only member of her family who didn't end up going to the gas chambers, she didn't want to talk an awful lot about her faith or her previous life. So for quite a long time, and I mean quite a long time, we as children didn't know anything at all about the Jewish faith or that side of my mother's life. And in fact, when we were small, she sent us to Sunday school, and then we used to go, because my father was regular army and we travelled with the army, we used to go to church services and scout church services and the like. So, I was brought up nominally as a Christian. It was quite interesting, actually, when my father was serving in Cyprus, my brother went through confirmation classes. And the day he was due to be confirmed, we suddenly found he couldn't be confirmed because, like me, he had never been baptised. They said, oh no, we can't do that. Now I know why. I didn't know at the time. So, at about the age of 13, and I remember very distinctly the occasion, I came home from school and was talking to my mother, who was at the kitchen sink, and said to her, talking to her about some of Jesus' miracles that we'd learnt about in religious education, which they used to have in school. And she turned around and said to me, yes, but how do you know that's all true? Now, I didn't question her about why she was asking that question, but I thought, well, if Mother doesn't believe that, then why should I? And the baby went out with the bathwater. And so for a very, very long time, I was without any real faith. Although I spent quite a lot of time searching and looking for the truth. And I used to go regularly to church in my 20s and 30s. And in fact, when we were living up just outside Manchester, there's a church I went to where the vicar and I used to have interesting conversations about faith. And one thing I learnt from him, because I used to try and find fudge ways of saying, it's all right, I can match this with science if I do this, but it wasn't real. And he said quite clearly, you are either for us or you're not. There are no middle paths, there are no fudges. And that's one thing I've held on to from all those conversations, which I think is extremely important. I think we fudge too much, even, within the church at times. So, at the age of probably just turned 40, I finally fully came to faith and was baptised at All Saints Church in Upper Bucklebury. In fact, there is one person present here, I think maybe two, yes, who were there at the time. Jackie and, yes. Were you there? Yeah, my brain's just gone. David, you were probably there as well, weren't you? Yes, but by sprinkling. Oh dear. I was told afterwards, Jackie was one of the people who told me afterwards, no, it should have been by total immersion. But it was quite a while after, and with no malice. So, yeah, that was my history. And yes, I went on, I think, from strength to strength from there. And one of the things that I really believe now is that it's absolutely vital for us as Christians. We've heard it already, we need to share our faith. We need to share our faith with a world that is dying for lack of it. There are people dying in their sins. My father, one of the reasons why I didn't grow up really as a Christian, my father believed, when you're dead, you're dead. And tragically, he is. And, I hate to think about where his eternal soul went. The one thing that really frightens me is something I heard from someone at one stage, which is, imagine your best friend going the way you don't want people to go at his death and saying to you, why didn't you tell me? That really hurts if you think about that. We really do have a responsibility to tell. So, that leads into my title for tonight, which, if the tech works, good, hooray, the reason for the hope we have. It's not that I want to give you a reason for the hope we have, but it's how we can share the imperative for us to share the reason for the hope that we have. And it comes from 1 Peter 3:15. But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. We need to be ready, but sometimes that's quite difficult because we don't know the words. We think, someone's going to ask us a question and we don't know the words. We don't know what we should say. And really what I want to impress tonight, what I really want us to go away with, is this understanding that we need to think about the questions that we're likely to be asked and be ready to answer them. And that gives us two benefits. One is we're in a very strong position when we are challenged, but also, and I've found this, and I'm sure you have in anything you've done where you've had to prepare, it strengthens your own faith. Because if you've gone through the things that you think people might question and you've found the answers, then you have the answers in your heart. It's a wonderful position to be in. I can't say that I have all the answers yet. Won't have until we go to the other side. The other thing that drives me for tonight is in Glendale Church, which is one of the churches I'm involved with, we have a motto verse for this year, which is Matthew 28, verse 19. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and of the Holy Spirit. So that imperative to share God's love with a hurting world is really strong. And one of the pastors, one of the leaders at Glendale Church recently said something which I found very useful, is when he is talking to someone who doesn't believe, one of the questions he will ask is, well, why don't you believe? Why don't you believe? A lot of people will not have a clear answer to that, but there are lots of questions or lots of answers to that question, and you might be able to think of quite a lot. But we'll look at some of them tonight. And in bringing that word, bringing that answer to people, we can use, to my mind, two things. We can use logic, reason. We can use emotion. Or we can use a combination of both. I remember in my early days as a Christian hearing a sermon from J. John. He was a wonderful evangelist. He still is a wonderful evangelist. But one of the things he said was, I've read John's Gospel and it really chimes with me. Why? Block your ears. Because it's true. Now, that doesn't really appeal to me because so what? I could tell you it's 10 miles from here to the moon because it's true and you won't believe me. But for some people, that emotional approach actually works. Reminds me of a story which I read in a book that was actually compiled by J. John about a school teacher who said to her class, I'm an atheist. I hope all of you are atheists. Could you all please put your hands up if you're an atheist? And all the children who didn't want to see him out of step put their hands up, except for one little girl who refused to put her hands up. And the teacher said, "Why haven't you put your hand up?" And she said, "Well, I'm not an atheist." "Oh, well, what are you then?" "I'm a Christian." "Oh." Teacher's getting quite irritated now. "But why are you a Christian?" "Well, my mother is a Christian and my father is a Christian, so I'm a Christian." "Oh, I don't like that." "Well, if your mother was a moron and your father were a moron, what would you be then?" And she said, after a few moments' thought, "I'd be an atheist." Yes, well, there are lots of different ways. So, reasons to believe or to not believe. First of all, science. The scientist says we can explain it all. We've got the Big Bang, we've got life emerging from the primordial soup, we've got evolution. I'm a scientist. I don't need faith. Interesting, actually, yesterday morning I experienced exactly that. I was walking one of our dogs, no, both of our dogs, on the canal path at Aldermaston, and I met a guy who I've met occasionally before, and we got into talking. And he said, "Oh, yes, we've talked about this and that before." And I said, "Yes, but we really need to talk about faith." They don't get away with it. And he said, "Oh, well, I don't believe. I'm a scientist. I was brought up as a scientist, so I don't believe. My wife believes and my daughter believes, but, and I let them. But I'm a scientist, so I don't believe." And we had quite an interesting conversation, and I left him with a couple of points, which he said, "Oh, I've never thought of that before." I'll give you one of them, but we're going to look at it a bit more in a while. One of them is this: evolution. Have you ever heard this? We were evolved from monkeys. You see, the ascent of man starts at a monkey and ends up with man. How did it come about? Well, the way evolution works, and it does actually exist, but it doesn't account for where we are. What evolution does is says the best survives. So the best then breeds, and you get better and better and better. Selective breeding. So there was a stage between us and a monkey that was better than a monkey. And then there was a stage further on than that, and further on than that, and further on than that. So the question I would ask is, if all those intermediate stages were better than monkeys, how come the monkeys are still here, and we're here, but none of the intermediate stages are here? Now that to me doesn't make sense. And he said, never thought of that. It's nice to have an answer, isn't it? The next thing is, and you even hear this within the church, all beliefs are valid. It doesn't have to be Christianity. All ways to God are acceptable. I don't believe that's true. I hope you don't, but we'll look at it a bit more. The next one, very frequent. Why does a caring God allow so much suffering in the world? Have you got an answer for that? We need to have it, because you'll get that question frequently. And if God cares, why doesn't he stop all these wars? Or, as my father said, it doesn't matter. When you're dead, you're dead. Or for younger people, it can wait. I'm young and I don't need to think about eternity. My intention here is not to have all the answers to all those questions. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but to encourage each one of us to be ready and confident to share. It's a what I call a virtuous circle. When you start to share, you see results. It strengthens your faith, and you share more, and you become stronger and better at it. You find the right words to say. It becomes familiar. It doesn't become so frightening. And then The more you do it, the better it gets. So, let's just have a look then at science. We talk about the primordial soup, that's what life sprang from. And actually, scientists believe that, you get this primordial soup and something happens, maybe a lightning bolt, and life spontaneously emerges from it. The statistical chances of that happening are incredibly remote, you might imagine. And there is a saying that's used in all sorts of circles called the monkeys and typewriters saying. Have you heard it? If you give enough monkeys, enough typewriters. My boss used to say it to me when he played snooker with me every time I potted a ball. Monkeys and typewriters, he'd say. So, monkeys and typewriters. The saying about monkeys and typewriters refers to the infinite monkey theorem, which posits that a monkey randomly pressing keys on a typewriter for an infinite amount of time will eventually produce any given text, including the complete works of Shakespeare. Now, if you didn't know better, you could believe that. You could believe, monkey rattling away to typewriter, something good's bound to come out eventually, isn't it? Well, I'm going to give you some monkeys. In fact, quite a lot of monkeys. But that's not enough. We want some more monkeys. And more still. In fact, what I'm going to say is, I'm going to give you some sums now, and I'm afraid if you don't like sums, just switch off for a minute. If I give you one monkey... Oh, sorry, I missed that. I'm only going to ask our monkeys to type this, Our Father who art in heaven. Only 28 characters, not the entire works of Shakespeare. So randomly I want our monkeys to type those 28 characters. If you give a monkey a typewriter with only 27 keys, so he's only got the letters and the space, because we need the spaces, and you allow him 2 attempts a minute for a whole year, he will do just over 1 million attempts. If you cover the entire Earth's surface with monkeys at 1 metre square per monkey, that's quite a lot of monkeys. It's that many monkeys. But I'm not going to give you that many monkeys. I'm going to actually stack them on the Earth 1,000 high, which is about 625 miles of monkey. And it's that many monkeys. It's an awful lot more monkeys. So we've got all those monkeys, and they're typing away, doing 1 million goes a year, each one of them. They would between them type Our Father who art in heaven once in every... Well, if you can work that number out, I can't say it, but it's a lot of noughts. That actually represents 7 billion times longer than scientists calculate the age of the Earth to be. That's the chance of a monkey or monkeys typing that 28 letters correctly. So I think the entire works of Shakespeare is a little bit further beyond them. It is more likely that that would happen than that a DNA molecule would spontaneously produce from the primordial soup. Do we really think that life could possibly have emerged without some intelligent power behind it? So let's have a look at that question. All beliefs are valid. It doesn't have to be Christianity. Well, within the church, I would say this. John 14, verse 6. If you believe the Bible, this is what John 14, verse 6 said. Jesus answered, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you're a Christian and you believe the Bible, you cannot believe that other faiths are valid to bring you to the Father. It cannot happen. And if we allow people to think that it can, we're deceiving them. We're risking their eternal souls. Also, this. The key figures in every world religion are dead. Only Jesus Christ, though he died on the cross, is alive and will be into eternity. And all other religions are trying to find our way to God by good works, prayer, meditation, whatever. I'm a good person, I've lived a good life. But our faith, the reason for our hope, is that in Jesus Christ, God came to seek and save the lost. God came. I remember someone once telling me, or suggesting, that we look at it like this. If you came across an ant's nest and things weren't quite right down there and you wanted to sort it out, what would you do about it? If you could, what you'd do is make yourself into an ant and get down there among them and sort it out. You certainly wouldn't be able to do it by staying as you are. And that is what God did. He came down as one of us and came among us to sort out our problems, to bring us back to him. It's a wonderful story. There may be other things you can say in that situation, but I'm just suggesting that there are things, there are answers to these questions. Why does a caring God allow suffering? It's one thing that exercises all of us at some time or another, I think. But it's true that God gave us a set of rules to live by. We humans disobeyed those rules, and so we suffer the consequences. It may have been originally back at Adam that sin came into the world, but it has stayed there. If you buy a new car and the manual tells you, put oil in the engine and check it regularly, and then you say, well, I'm just not going to bother, or you just don't know. I don't follow the manual and let the engine run with no oil, you'll probably end up with this. It's not because the car manufacturer said, I'm going to punish you for doing it wrong. He told you in the first place, do it this way. If you don't do it this way, things will go wrong. If we don't follow the maker's instructions, we can expect things to go wrong. And that is why we have suffering in the world, because we haven't followed the maker's instructions. It's a tragedy that what we see as the innocent suffer for those who have got it wrong. Similarly, if God cares, why doesn't he stop all the wars? Well, I have two words. Free will. We're not robots controlled by the Maker. He allows us to do things our way, but tells us what way to do them. And if we don't, then this is the mess the world gets into. It's because we haven't followed what the Lord has asked us to do. We have used our free will incorrectly. It doesn't matter. When you're dead, you're dead. Well, it couldn't matter more. Eternity is a very long time. People say, I've lived a good life, and, I don't have to worry. Why would a loving God not accept me in the end? And again, we let people down if we say, they're there. You've done the right things. It doesn't matter if you follow Jesus. Because again, we are risking their eternal souls. They need to be told. We fudge that issue far too often. We fudge the issue that there will be judgment. if we don't tell people both sides of the coin, we are really not doing our jobs. That doesn't mean, of course, we have to preach hellfire and damnation to everybody all the time. Maybe just some of the time. It can wait. I'm young and I don't need to think about eternity. Just think about what it says in Luke 12, verses 18 to 20, when the rich man who was doing extremely well talked about what he was going to do with all his riches. And he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain, laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? We do not know the moment when our life is going to be taken from us. And if we're not ready, and if we allow people to think that they've got time, then again we're letting them down. Tomorrow, I've heard it said, is a date only in a fool's diary. Keep short accounts with God. We had a lovely example of this at Glendale quite recently. And I'm involved with a youth cafe, youth club that we run on a Friday night. It's a great thing. We have 30 to 35 young people coming every Friday night, letting off steam after a week at school. It's absolute chaos. But wonderfully, most of them are totally unchurched, so it's a wonderful opportunity to share with them. Rachel Joyce, our youth leader, and her husband took them away, or 16 of them, to a youth camp this weekend just past, which went extremely well. But the interesting thing is that one of the lads, when he came back from the summer holidays, the first thing he did was show us where he'd actually crashed his bicycle quite horrendously, and the handlebars had turned round and literally pierced his chest here. He was 7 hours before he actually got medical help, and the doctors actually said, I don't know why you're dead. Now, one of the things we always do every time when those lads leave on a Friday night is pray protection over them. That lad survived. He showed us he had a scar from there to there. It looks absolutely horrendous. But he went away on that weekend, and it really came home to him, and he was actually asking all the right questions, because he realised, I could have died then. Where would I have been then? He saw how important it was. It's an absolute amazing thing that the Lord really puts us in the right place at the right time to help people in those occasions. So, in summary, we're called to make Jesus known and to share the good news to which we are privy. Why should we keep it to ourselves? One thing that I always relate when I'm talking about this is, you're all familiar, I'm sure, with a very formulaic type of disaster movie, where there's an impending disaster and the hero knows what's going to happen. He knows that there's a crack at the bottom of the dam that's going to get bigger and bigger, and the dam is going to fail and the whole city is going to be swept away, or something similar. He could save himself, but he doesn't. What he does is goes and tries to persuade people that they need to get out. He tries to rescue them. But there's always vested interests fighting against him in one way or another. And eventually he does persuade everybody, and he gets them clear, at the risk very often of his own life. Well, that's where we should be in our Christian walk. We should be taking those risks. We should be telling the people, there is a disaster confronting you. You need to know about it. You need to do something about it. And we need to, each one of us, to decide what our role is. We're not all the same. I couldn't, for instance, do as some people I know can do, which is go round and knock on people's doors. That just isn't me. But if I meet people in the street, that's why I wear this cross all the time, by the way. One reason is to remind me of who I am or what I am. But also, it's a very good way of getting people asking you questions. And you can relate. It's really a good tool. The other very good tool, by the way, is get a dog and go and walk your dog. You get to know everybody in the village. Mind you, I know them all by their dogs' names, but not by their own names, but there you are. So we've all got different ways of meeting that calling. We're all different. We all work in different ways. Find out what yours is. You know, it may be that yours is simply living a life which shines out Jesus' love. My favourite quote, I could get my wife to quote it for me because she knows it off by heart, she's heard it so many times. Preach the word at all times. If necessary, use words. Live it. I remember when I was confirmed, the bishop who was giving the address, incidentally, I spoke from that same pulpit for the first time in St Mary's at Bucklebury almost exactly 30 years later, which was a wonderful experience for me. But in his address, he actually spoke of a vicar in a village that he used to live in, who was an absolutely shocking, awful preacher, probably like me. But everybody hung on his every word. And why? Because he lived it. He lived it. Next thing is, I would say, just remember, as I do, your own salvation. Who helped to bring you to the Lord? Are you grateful for that? Do you think it was a good thing? Well, go and do likewise. Don't just walk away. And then, most importantly, pray for the guidance and wisdom of the Holy Spirit to prepare you to serve, to bring you alongside those in need. You know, you pray for things like that and they will happen. One of the things, I think it said in the early slide, that because I'm Jewish, I have a heart for bringing the word to the Jewish people. Elizabeth, my wife, used to work for a mission which actually takes the word to Jewish people, Messianic Testimony. And I love their work, although I am still convinced to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. So, you know, my focus isn't entirely on work with the Jews. But I have sought and prayed to meet Jewish people and be able to speak to them. And it was only a couple of weeks ago that I was out walking the dog in the morning, and I met a lady who I've met a few times, and I told her the day before that I was suffering from a bit of a cold, and she said, "Oh, how are you getting on with your cold?" And I said, "Well, you know, it's getting better and I shan't die of it." I said, but you never know. And I used that phrase, you know, we've all got to keep short accounts with God because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And she said, well, you know, all faiths say that. And I said, yes, but Christianity is different. And I gave her some of the favourite phrases. And she said, well, I'm a convinced Jew. And I thought, wonderful, thank you, Lord. And I said, well, actually, I'm a Jew too. And I said, you know, go away and read Isaiah 53 and then come and talk to me again. Because that's what they don't read in the synagogue. The bits that really point to Jesus. Yes, the whole Old Testament points to Jesus, but Isaiah 53, I think, is a wonderful example. I will, she said, I will. Well, I haven't seen her since, but maybe she's avoided me. I can't imagine why, of course. So, yes, we need to pray for the guidance and wisdom of the Holy Spirit to bring people alongside us, to bring us alongside the right people, to have the wisdom, the insight, to know how to deal with each one. We've already heard an example tonight where someone really has been guided to the right place and, most importantly, answered the call. Yeah. You know, it takes courage to do that. But when you've done it once, it becomes easier. As to use Steve's phrase, I'm sort of coming into land now. In fact, I'm on my final approach. So I think it's a time when we can come to prayer, and I really want us to pray for that wisdom, that guidance, that insight from the Holy Spirit to help us to do what we are asked to do as Christians. And perhaps we'd like to stand and have a prayer. And I'm going to hand over then to Jules, both to lead us in prayer and to lead us in worship.